Today on Inside Utah Politics, how the legislature impacted your life. Robert Gehrke with the Salt Lake Tribune here to weigh in on what he sees as the biggest hits and misses from the session. And a bipartisan effort to address safety concerns over TickTock. Why the bill's sponsors say President Biden should have more power to respond.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Salt Lake Tribune columnist Robert Gehrke here for a recap of the legislative session. Always great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Last year at this time, we spent the entire segment talking about a bombshell in the midnight hour. This year, there was literally no midnight hour.
Midnight hour.
That's how different sessions can be from time to time. So as you take a look at this one overall, how would you define it?
You know, I think the first 2 weeks of the session, we saw those big bills roll out, the voucher bill and the transgender ban, transgender therapy ban. And I think those kind of set the tone for the entire session, everything that was to follow. You know, we also had, I think, a lot of new members, 16 new Republican members, who all came in raring to go and really to make an impact on this session. And I think they did. I think the leadership in the past has been able to kind of rein people in when they, went too far. This time, I don't think they had that same leverage over this new crowd. And so you saw a different tone, I think. And this is not just me saying this. This is a lot of people I've talked to up on the Hill and in the week since the session ended. It was just sort of a distinctive tone compared to what we've seen in the past.
In your article during the week, you basically said that it was shifting away from the Utah way that we've seen over previous years. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, we've had these examples of where we've taken these very emotional issues, immigration, LGBTQ issues, and kind of set aside those differences, brought people together, and done the hard work to get to a compromise solution, something that sort of eschews the strident ideological approach that we see in other states. And that, Gary Herbert coined that as the Utah way. I don't think we saw very much of that this session, and I think it partly is because of these new members who were so strident and eager to get things done and make a mark in a way that they kind of come out of this Trump mentality of the Republican Party. And they replaced people who are a lot more moderate in many cases. And so I think it changed the makeup and changed the tone of the session. And we didn't see that sort of collaborative approach. We didn't see that respect for divergent viewpoints and trying to come to something that isn't an all or nothing solution.
You pinpointed, I believe, 4 bills specifically in your argument for that.
Yeah.
It's important to point out that while those were introduced and they were voted on in the session, none of them ended up crossing the finish line. So what do you make of that?
Well, some of them did, some of them didn't. I think the transgender bill is a good example of one that there wasn't this bringing people together and working to find a middle ground. It was just, we now have a ban in place that's immediate and indefinite. I think the school voucher bill is one that we could have maybe come to some compromise on. I think that the sponsor of that tried to hold that back until and then sprung it on the body and early in the session and rammed it through. There were a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion bills.
Those are the ones.
Those are the ones. There was only one of them that got through, Tim Jimenez's bill, that sort of restricts what teachers can teach and how they can teach it when it comes to race and ethnicity. A couple others got derailed, but those aren't going away. These are bills that are going to be back in the next session and the session after that until they pass, because these new members aren't going away. It's just a shift in the tone and a shift in the willingness to have the hard conversations and do the hard work to get to these collaborative compromise solutions.
Let's focus more on the first 2 weeks. You brought that up already. That we knew it was coming before the session started, as we were talking with our sources. We saw a small hint of that the year before with the mask mandate that kind of came out in the first week. Do you think that Republican leadership and legislative leadership is looking at that as a success and maybe something we'll continue to see down the road?
I think it is. I think they realize that if we put all of these big hot button issues at the beginning of the session, then at the end of the session we can focus on the nuts and bolts of why they're there, setting a budget, doing the spending, working through the tax cuts that they wanted to get done, and and then picking up little pieces as it goes. And as a result, I think you saw them finish their work early and still manage to pass more bills than they've passed in history, 575 bills. And so, you know, in terms of the workflow that they've done the past couple of years, I think they kind of have been refining that, and what we saw this year was a product of that.
And do you see that as a successful strategy?
I think from a PR standpoint, for their own purposes, it's a successful strategy because it kind of puts those things behind them. I think from in terms of being able to focus on the big nuts and bolts issues, I think it does that without having the distractions. And it also, I mean, frankly, it gives them a little bit of leverage over members who maybe are on the fence on some of these issues, because if they want their bills to pass down the stretch, they need to be in line early in the session. And so it gives them a lot more leverage and power in dealing with their caucuses.
As you take a look at a whole now that it's over, what do you see as some of the biggest wins during this legislative session?
Yeah, I do a lot of complaining about the things that I think they do wrong, and I could spend a whole show on that. But I think they do deserve some credit for a few things that they did. I'm really pleased with this $200 million they got for water agriculture optimization, because for so long we've been talking about, you know, should we let our lawns die and things like that. That's a drop in the lake, so to speak, for, you know, when we're talking about agriculture using about 3/4 of the water in the state. You know, that's where you need to focus your efforts. So I think that's a good thing. I'm really pleased to see they expanded full day kindergarten. I think that's going to make a big difference for those kids and their families who are going to have a little bit of breathing room when it comes to childcare. They extended postpartum benefits for new mothers who would in the past get kicked off of Medicaid after 60 days after they give birth. Now they have a full year. I think that gives them a lot of peace of mind. Yeah, there were some good things. There's the affordable housing, a tax credit they created, I think $56 million they're putting toward this affordable housing tax credit. That's going to leverage a lot of money and make a big difference when we're talking about getting more affordable housing on the market. So yeah, there are a lot of things that they did well, and I think deserve a lot of credit for.
I heard a lot of lawmakers this year saying, I'm very confident the governor is going to sign my bill, because there seemed to be, to me, I'd like your take on this, there seemed to be, to me, more working together between the legislative and executive branch before getting to the point where it came down to signing the bill, where they kind of came to agreement on a lot of these issues. Yeah,
and I think some of the bills that he might have been candidates for his veto pen didn't make it through, and probably because he engaged in that process early. Yeah, I would be surprised, frankly, if he vetoes any bills. There are groups that are calling for a couple vetoes. One of them on that bill about teaching ethnic and racial issues in school. That was one that people are calling for a veto on. One of them on the language that was added to a bill to allow cougar hunting all year round. Some environmental groups are calling for vetoes on that. I'd be surprised if he vetoes any of it. And I think part of it is the governor realizes he's got to be involved early in the process, because when he vetoed bills in his first term, he got overridden. And so he doesn't want to go through that embarrassment again.
That makes sense.
And it also doesn't, politically, he wants to protect his right flank and doesn't want to be attacked from the right for vetoing a bill that's popular with them.
Yeah, I don't see any vetoes coming as far as all-out vetoes on bills either. We have about 30 seconds left, but the state flag, that issue was just amazing to watch that happen.
Yeah.
And now it's going to referendum, possibly, if they're able to gather the signatures. How did this become so controversial?
This is an issue where we have a very vocal, noisy minority who was going to make a big issue about this being a woke flag. And they showed up and they turned out to their meetings and got the attention of some of the members. But this was not an issue that they can try to get signatures for a referendum. This is not an issue that the public cares enough about to oppose. They're not as worked up as these people are. But it sort of shows the flaw in the process that we have, because you can get these very vocal minorities that can make enough noise that they get their attention of their members and can influence the process in ways that I don't think are healthy or helpful to the process.
And that was probably the issue that the public had the most opportunity to weigh in on than I've seen in a long time.
You had a full 2-year run-up on that one. Yeah,
okay.
and I think from what I've heard from people, they either don't care about the flag or they like it. They think it's a nice change.
All right, Robert Gehrke, appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Still to come, the Utah GOP chair says he's done after one term, following in the footsteps of his predecessor. Our panel weighs in on the transient nature of that position a little later. But first, lawmakers grilling the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, in a Senate committee hearing, why they are concerned the economy could take a hit, and his response. Two U.S. senators are cracking down on TickTock. A Democrat and Republican senator introducing a bill to give the president authority to respond to security threats posed by the platform. This comes as just last week, the White House giving all federal agencies 30 days to wipe TickTock from all government devices. Anna Gehrke in the nation's capital with more.
Senators from both parties are teaming up against TickTock.
China, through their technology, is stealing Americans' data.
South Dakota Republican John Thune says the Chinese-owned social media app won't be the last similar threat to our national security.
The Chinese Communist Party has proven over the last few years that it is willing to lie about just about everything. That likely won't end with TickTock.
On Tuesday, Thune and Virginia Democrat Mark Warner introduced the Restrict Act, which would give the president and Secretary of Commerce the authority to prohibit any foreign technology posing a security risk. Warner says that includes software, hardware, and social media platforms.
It's genuinely risk-based.
The senators say their bill is different from the one House Republicans introduced last week because it doesn't single out TickTock. Opponents of that bill argued it would violate the First Amendment.
The idea of having a rules-based process that identifies types of technologies, we think will stand up better in court muster.
This is trying to stop a foreign adversary from spying on Americans' private lives.
But Missouri Republican Josh Hawley says targeting TickTock is exactly what Congress should do.
TikTok, we know, is a backdoor for Beijing, so let's just ban it outright.
The White House supports the bipartisan bill and is urging Congress to act quickly and send it to the president's desk. In Washington, I'm Anna Gehrke.
The head of the Federal Reserve in the hot seat on Capitol Hill, lawmakers questioning Chairman Powell about the U.S. economy and fighting inflation. This as many families struggle to get by. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson with that story.
The chairman of the Federal Reserve says because of stubborn inflation, the central bank needs to raise interest rates higher than expected.
The process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go and is likely to be bumpy.
But Ohio Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown says raising interest rates is not always the answer.
And raising interest rates certainly won't stop big corporations from exploiting all of these crises to jack up prices far beyond the increase in their costs.
Alabama Republican Senator Katie Britt asked Chairman Powell whether the solution to higher prices is more domestic energy production.
If there were an increase of energy production in this country, do you feel like that would help drive down inflation?
Over time, more energy would mean lower energy prices.
However, Chairman Powell says the current need is balancing the labor market through an increase in unemployment. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren says Powell is taking the wrong approach.
How would you explain your view that they need to lose their jobs?
I would explain to people more broadly that inflation is extremely high and it's hurting the working people of this country badly, all of them.
Another rate hike is expected when the Fed meets again later this month. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Still to come, high turnover among the state party chairs in Utah. Our panel weighs in on why after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Senator Todd Weiler and former Utah Democratic Party Chair Jeff Merchant. Gentlemen, great to have both of you with us. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn.
Let's dig into first the party chair position. Jeff, something you know firsthand pretty well, but we saw the Utah GOP chair, Carson Jorgenson, announce he will not seek another term after serving only one term. And on his way out, he says dishonesty and disloyalty seem to be the traded currency in politics. Senator Weiler, let's start with you since it's your party. What do we make of this?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what Carson's referring to. I like Carson. I think he's done a good job as chair. There's, I don't agree with everything he's ever said, but that hasn't been my experience in Utah politics. I think that there is some backstabbing that goes on, but I think Utahns are mostly good people trying to do their best. So I'm sad that that's been his takeaway from his 2 years as party chair.
Jeff, again, as I mentioned, this is something you know well. Talk about the party chair position and the transient nature we see really on both sides with the two major parties.
Yeah, you know, look, this is a tough job, primarily volunteer. Some people end up getting paid, but I mean, I know that I wasn't. This is a hard thing to do, and you know, the line that I always think of with party politics, especially as the chair, is that you get credit for nothing when it goes right, and you get blamed every time something goes wrong. So it is a really hard thing to get people to stick around for a long time. And that's been a problem that Republicans and Democrats have had in Utah for a while. I think that we could solve some of our party problems if we kind of stuck with specific people for a longer period of time. But I think that there are some fundamentals that are going to have to change to make that a reality in a place like Utah.
Senator, does it harm a party when we see so much turnover like we have, especially over the last several years in the Utah GOP?
Yeah, I don't know that it harms the party. I think it's nice to have volunteers step up. I'll tell you, on the Republican side, up until Governor Huntsman, we usually had a U.S. senator or a governor asking someone to run for party chair, and Huntsman kind of ended that practice. And quite frankly, it's kind of been hit or miss since then. You know, I understand the delegates get to choose, but I do think it helps if the party chair is closely aligned with the governor or the next U.S. senator up for re-election.
Jeff, you had mentioned before we started this segment that in other states you see party chairs with a longer stay in office. What do you make of that when you compare it to what we see here?
Yeah, you know, I really do think that having longer tenure is a good thing for a party. It provides a lot of stability. And at the end of the day, the party's primary roles are raising money, it's investing in data and investing in people. And when you have every 2 years a new chair come in, I mean, you know, Jorgenson's a good example of getting rid of most of the Republican staff. I think that what you see is that the people that are making the day today move forward in the party, when they get replaced every couple of years, you have no institutional memory and no long-term vision or plan. So having one person in for an extended period of time, I think, is only beneficial to a party.
Let's move on to the legislative session. Senator, how do you assess the job you and your colleagues did up on the Hill this year?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of critics for the legislature. I think it was a good session, probably one of the best sessions I've been involved with. Historic tax cuts, historic increases in education funding and teacher salaries, another $500 million to try to save the Great Salt Lake. I think those were some of the highlights. As a state, you know, there's probably a few misses. I know some people are disappointed we didn't take up the clergy exemption with, you know, with sex offenders and things like that. But, you know, that's a privilege that's been around for thousands of years. And you know, I think there's good arguments on both sides of that.
Jeff, let's hear your assessment.
Hey, you know, I think it was Mark Twain who said, "No man's life, liberty, or property is safe while the legislature's in session." So, frankly, I'm just glad that it's over. Certainly the legislature's done a lot of work. I think that there was a lot of things that could have been done that weren't done. I think that there's a lot more work that could have been done with water and the Great Salt Lake. There's certainly a lot of air issues that probably could have been addressed. And then certainly we got distracted by a number of issues that really, in my mind, don't seem to raise to the level of time that was spent on them. But overall, you know, I mean, at least it was only 45 days.
There's been some talk about the makeup of this legislature shifting to the right. Senator, do you believe that's the case, and what did you see?
Well, in the Senate, all of the Republicans came back, and so I haven't seen that in the Senate.
Yeah, mostly in the House.
Yeah, in the House we had, you know, about over 15 freshmen, and I do think a lot of the new replacements were younger and more conservative than the people they replaced. You know, a good example of that is Steve Handy and Trevor Lee. So I think there's some truth to that.
Your thoughts on that, Jeff, and what impact did it have this session?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a 20% turnover. We lost two very moderate Democrats that I think represented Salt Lake County very well. And they were replaced, along with a number of other moderate Republicans, with people that are more interested in national politics and further right-leaning ideas and concepts. And I don't think that that really helps when we're trying to deal with really, really big issues that we've been dealing with for 30 or 40 years and still haven't been able to solve. So again, I think that there was a lot of distraction that didn't need to happen, that occurred probably as a result of some of these individuals who were newly elected.
Senator, your thoughts on what Jeff says are distractions and what others say were message bills or cultural war bills?
Well, I think that, some of these social issues are things that people care about on both sides of the aisle. And, I would rather deal with them at the state level than have Congress try to dictate everything to us. I do think that some of the more extremist ideas on both sides of the aisle were either watered down or did not pass, which is what usually happens in the Utah legislative sessions.
We saw this year the legislature really jump off the bat right in the beginning. We saw two really highly debated bills get passed in the first 2 weeks. Jeff, what did you make of that strategy we saw from the legislature this year?
I think that it probably was a good idea to get some of those big issues out in front and try and get them resolved. As we know, a lot of bills end up getting final passage at the very last minute. And I think that, whether you liked those bills or didn't like those bills, it was very smart to address those at the front end. So they had plenty of time in case issues came up. And as we know, sure, the Republicans have a supermajority. That does not mean that things pass very quickly or very easily. And I think that it was probably a good strategy for them to start with some of their top priorities early on.
Senator, your thoughts on that? The president and speaker making no bones about it that would be the strategy going into this session.
Yeah, we did the same thing last year with some of the COVID bills that were divisive. Over 90% of our bills are pretty much bipartisan supported. And so, it's kind of the strategy, do you rip off the Band-Aid slow or do you do it fast? And the voucher bill and the transgender health bill, those were divisive bills, and they decided to rip off the Band-Aid fast. And I don't fault them for it. They got criticized for doing the transgender sports bill on the last day of the session last year, and then they get criticized for doing, controversial things in the first 2 weeks. If people don't like the policy, they're always going to attack the procedure no matter when you do it.
Let's talk about the state flag, the new flag. That really drew a lot of attention. It was a highly debated bill on the Capitol or on Capitol Hill as well. Were you surprised to see so many people come out and get involved in this process? And when you talk about process, this one really went on for a long time. A lot of public input went into this, Jeff.
Yeah, lots and lots of public input, lots and lots of talk and debate and discussion. And I have no idea how much money was spent on this, probably far more than it needed to be. But yeah, I think that it's good that people were involved in the process. I know that now there's talk about a referendum to repeal it. Look, I can't say that this is my favorite flag in the world, but I can't say that the old flag was my favorite flag either. So I think that the good thing about this was that people were involved. Lots of people had input. The one thing that I don't think anybody can say is that the people didn't get the opportunity to talk about it.
Senator, we have about 30 seconds left. Why did this become such a controversial issue?
Well, I think flags are symbols that people identify with. I love the new state flag. I think people will warm up to it. I'm not certain that the referendum will get enough signatures, but if it does, I think that's great advertisement for the new flag. And change is hard for some people, but I think this is a really good move for the state of Utah.
Gentlemen, really appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning.
Thanks, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Governor Cox reviewing legislation passed by the state legislature. He has until Thursday, March 23rd to take action. The final day to begin a veto override session is Tuesday, May 2nd. And this year is the municipal election year. The primary is set for Tuesday, August 15th. Make sure to connect with me on social media or through email. Let me know what's on your mind and what issues are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.